Thank y'all. We're going to go ahead and get started with session 5 from just 11 to 12. And I'd like to go ahead and hand it over to our moderator of session 5, Randall Mathews.
Thank you, Heather. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for that passion. I like that. So my name is Randall Mathews. I'm the Deputy Director for Chatham Emergency Management Agency down in Savannah, Georgia. So thank you all for that attended down in Savannah last year. Great to see some familiar faces. That's right. So I am the Deputy Director for Chatham Emergency Management Agency. In addition to that, I am also an advisory board member for the SCDRP. Part of those functions are serving as part of the development committee. So if that is something that you're interested in learning a little bit more about, it's about how we can go through and sustain this great organization, make sure that we can continue having these conferences, maintaining these relationships, and building new relationships. That's what the development committee is about, is trying to make sure we're able to fund those opportunities. So if you'd like to learn more about that, please get with myself, Heather, or Holly is floating around here as well. So this session is about advances in disaster recovery. So I have 3 fantastic panelists here with me today. I have Dr. Meredith Hovis, I have Jeanine Neipert, and also joined by Maggie Steenburg. So our session here is going to be diving into 3 different components. We're going to be looking at a data-driven approach to disaster recovery. We're going to be talking about planning for disaster recovery, and then the post-disaster recovery operations. So I'd like to give a brief introduction to our panelists and then start doing some rapid-fire questions here. And we will be saving some time for questions in the end of this. But I did also want to make note that we do have a flyer full of resources that is being handed out right now, so please make sure you take one of those, some great resources there. All right, our first panelist here, Dr. Meredith Hovis, is a second-year assistant professor in the Department of Environmental Sciences right here at UNC Wilmington. She is an interdisciplinary social scientist, commonly using qualitative and quantitative methods in public administration, policy, and economic disciplines. Her primary areas of expertise include nature-based solutions, community engagement, and co-production of knowledge, climate adaptation, disaster resilience, and natural resource management, policy, and economics. Jeanine has been part of the emergency management community since 2007, with an ongoing focus in the areas of hazard mitigation and resiliency planning. Prior to her move into the private sector at IEM, she has served in various positions at FEMA, including as the Hazard Mitigation Branch Director on the National Incident Management Assistance Team, the Hazard Mitigation Deputy Branch Director, and the Hazard Mitigation Grants and Planning Group Supervisor. And then our final panelist, Maggie Steenburg, currently serves as the Assistant Director for Miami-Dade County Department of Emergency Management, where she is responsible for overseeing the Mitigation, Recovery, and Resilience Directorate. In addition to her job with Miami-Dade County, she is also an adjunct professor of emergency management at Florida International University in Miami. So now it's time for those hard-hitting questions. I hope you're ready for it. All right. Dr. Hovis, I'd like to point to you first and see if you could bring up some examples of what emerging technologies are improving climate adaptation and long-term resilience in disaster-prone regions.
Great, thank you. So again, my name is Meredith Hovis. I mainly work with social science data, qualitative and quantitative. The sheet that's been passed around is not an exhaustive list of tools, emerging technologies, right? I actually printed this off before I heard about all the great resources from the QR codes from yesterday, right? But it gives a good start, and I'm gonna talk about some of these. So emerging technologies. A lot of these tools that you see are using AI, right? We can't escape it. Maybe some of us, right, maybe don't want to use artificial intelligence, machine learning, but a lot of the tools, believe it or not, that we use day-to-day basis are using AI. So some of the examples on that, right, that are using AI are NOAA's Digital Coast. Okay, so maybe some of you all use this in your own work, right? But this is a platform that can simulate and analyze risks and coastal change trends. Okay, Hovis FEMA, anyone use this platform? Yeah, some of you in your work, great. Is a loss estimation tool, right? So it can actually predict potential loss damages from different types of hazards, maybe hurricanes, right, flooding, and even earthquakes, right? All of these tools are actually using AI components. And a really big one also that are super important is GIS, which is Geospatial Information Systems. I work with a lot of communities, and they respond really well to visuals and to maps, right? You can actually plot where your house is, where your neighborhood is. And a lot of these tools that I have provided on this handout use GIS. So example, FEMA's RAPT, does anyone use that? Resilience Analysis and Planning tool, actually has about 100 different data layers that you can overlap with each other. From anything related to census data, okay, hazard probability for flooding, infrastructure locations, heat index locations, just to give you an example of those. What I love about some of these tools, right, is that they are free. This is huge. And very accessible in the sense that a lot of them have tutorials or videos or tours on actually how to use these tools. So this kind of goes back to the last session that we heard from, right? All of these tools that are accessible and free that can be used in recovery plans. So I'll stop there and I'll probably talk more about these tools within this session.
All right, thank you for that. You know this is an emergency management panel because it's full of acronyms. It wouldn't be emergency management without tons of acronyms. Now I'd like to ask Jeanine a question here. As we know, these disasters that communities can face are going to be incredibly expensive. So recovering from those disasters is going to take a long time. And that's going to be a process that's worked through reimbursements, not cash up front for helping communities recover. So what can local governments do that may not have a large cash reserve do to better prepare themselves with the heavy price tags of disasters?
Wow, that was a big question. Thanks for that. First of all, thank you all for having me. My name's Jeanine. I appreciate being here. Thank you, Heather and Claire, of course. And thank you all for getting me dressed. So I live on a small island off the coast of Georgia. What do I have to do? Okay, right. So I live on an island off the coast of Georgia, and a few years ago when I went into the private sector, they said you can work from home. And for me, that's huge because I've spent most of my adult life living in hotel rooms in disaster areas, places that have been impacted by disaster. And so I got really excited because it was the first time in nearly 20 years I had a library card. Go, right? YMCA membership. Who gets excited? I do. But the clothes thing. So I live on this island. And for me, getting dressed up is putting a sweatshirt on over my t-shirt and wearing shoes. So I couldn't do the socks, but I did do everything else. So thank you for that. And a round of applause for me. Clothes, look, clothes. On a serious note, yes. One of the biggest challenges communities have after a disaster is coming up with the money, whether it's their cost share, whether it's coming up with the money in advance, pre-reimbursement. And over the years, what I've seen folks kind of overlook is public-private partnerships within their local communities. So not the big box stores, not the Walmart, the Costco's, but the guy who owns the hardware store, right? Are you willing to give us supplies? The gal who works at the grocery store, are you willing to give us commodities? The big thing when it comes to not having the cash is remembering that in-kind services, okay? So for many of the programs that you're applying for or the work that you're doing, whether it's public assistance, whether it's hazard mitigation, is really quantifying what you're doing on a local level, how much your labor is costing. So if you can get volunteers from your local fire department to demo that house, for instance, or you can get your local building code inspector to put in some extra hours, it's those in-kind, tangible hours that you can quantify into coming up with your cost share. So to me, that's incredibly beneficial, and it's also looking into the community to say, hey, you know, the feds aren't going to come and save us, right? We've talked a lot about the new norm, if you will, the shifting kind of plates underneath our feet that we are facing every day in the current climate. And so I think it's incredibly important to touch base with what you have locally and realize what you have, because it's often overlooked. The guy at the hardware store, he's going to be more than willing to lend a hand 9 times out of 10. So that's my response, Randall. And I appreciate you letting me go into my clothes thing, because I'm amazed.
All right, thank you for that.
Randall, do you mind if I add a little bit? I on that topic, right, about communities and what they can do, right, when they're facing down these major disasters and they are finding themselves cash strapped, right? Or you're looking ahead, right, and you're saying, we're not ready, right? We're not ready for this. We can't sustain these losses. I know in Miami-Dade, we're acutely familiar with this because we've been skirted by major disasters in recent years, while our colleagues and our friends on the west coast of Florida have not been so lucky. So, you know, in this recent storm season, Florida had 3 landfall hurricanes. We were spared all of them. And they were major hurricanes. They've caused devastating losses. And these communities are going to take years, if not decades, to really come back, right? Not only because it just takes time to rebuild, but also because the financial implications of recovering from these disasters is really, really huge. And one thing that we are grappling with, I think, is as communities, as people who prepare and plan for these disasters and try to encourage our communities to be more resilient to them, I think that one of the areas we can really all focus on is preparing to recover. And it sounds easier than it is, right? But it's a newish concept, right? A lot of times in this space, people don't know what emergency management is. They don't understand what disasters are until they actually occur. And so getting the public support and even the buy-in of elected officials and government agencies that have to spend money on this can sometimes be a challenge. But you know, getting people into that preparedness mindset, not just preparing how we're going to respond, but preparing to recover. And I think that that's a really big shift in how we think about disasters, is preparing to recover, beginning that phase as early as possible. And things that I mean by that are, you know, for these communities that don't know how they're going to pay for it or don't know how they would possibly approach recovery, the more proactive they are on the front end, the better positioned they will be after. A lot of these programs that will ultimately fund your recovery require so much investment on the front end that if you wait until it occurs, you're already behind, you know, the 8 ball on that. So, you know, you've got to start early. You have to start investing in the right staff and the right subject matter experts who understand the programs, who understand grants, who understand eligibility. It's a difficult thing because the rules change all the time, and if you're not living it all the time, it's very easy to overlook these details. So I think preparing to recover in the same way where we prepare to respond is a really, really important lesson that everyone needs to kind of, you know, take into account. And you know, further to that, it's preparing your government agencies and your departments to understand the funding streams, the grant process, the eligibility, right? Even things as simple as how are you documenting and tracking your expenses, and what policies you're utilizing to make sure it's all compliant, right? These are really important steps that you cannot wait until it already occurs to start working on. So prepare to recover. Biggest piece of advice I would have there. The other thing is we don't just need to prepare our governments to recover, we need to prepare our residents to recover. So we need to be thinking about how are individual households going to bounce back from this. Understanding that, the financial burden placed on governments, especially local governments, well surpasses what they actually are able to do when you're dealing with something really catastrophic. And we see it now more than ever in the current political climate. The desire and the will to fund multi-billion-dollar disasters year after year after year is starting to wear thin. And it's going to be the case regardless of the outcome or future of FEMA as an agency, right? Is that disasters should be local, and more of this responsibility is shifting lower down. And so how do we not only prepare our governments, but also understand that there's a limitation to that capacity, and we have to prepare individual people and residents as well. And so that comes in the form of a variety of things. We're talking about preparedness for homes, right? Hardening infrastructure, doing homeowner mitigation projects, things to lessen those impacts, but also equipping them with the right financial tools to be financially resilient in the face of these things. Insurance is a huge driver of that, and the various insurance products that are out there, but so are things we can do at the community level to lower risk, right? So engaging in community rating system, for example, and working to lower insurance premiums. So there's a lot of stuff in that space, which Randall has great questions for, but I would say the preparing to recover is one of the best, I guess, tools or tactics we probably have to get people over that hump of these really, really costly disasters.
So you make a really good point, Maggie. Preparing to recover is incredibly important, but if you're local governments, it's almost like, well, how do I do that? There's no really, there's fact sheets and job aids and things of that ilk. And what I've found is folks are often perplexed, particularly if they haven't experienced a disaster or they haven't experienced one in many years, or certainly of the magnitude they may have recently experienced. And so preparing to recover, what I've found, one of the greatest tools is reaching out to other local communities in advance. And whether that's through an association of governments, a council, the Association of Mayors. North Carolina, for instance, has a wonderful organization which is strictly all of the mayors from all of the communities. And so reaching out to those folks and say, well, how did you guys do this? And even if it's in advance, as Maggie indicated, I know that I see Manuel back there. Manuel, are you typing? Are you listening to me? We're good friends. We can do this. So I was in Puerto Rico for about, a year and a half after Maria, immediately after Maria, and then went back to Puerto Rico and worked on all of Puerto Rico's hazard mitigation grant program projects. So helped all of their communities and nonprofits develop their mitigation projects. And Puerto Rico had at the time, and may still have, if my math's correct, Manuel, close to $3 billion in HMGP dollars, and then when you add in the match, another billion, so $4 billion in mitigation projects. And I remember years ago, when Manuel was leading the charge and just starting in kind of the initial stages of long-term recovery, he brought in, and I thought this was very smart, one of the best things that he could have done as the head of all of recovery for Puerto Rico was to bring in Jeffrey Gearing, who is from the state of Louisiana, and had many disasters in Louisiana and hurricanes, and it was one leader reaching out to another and saying, hey, how did you navigate this? What did you do? Because I haven't had to do this before. So, buddy, I need your help. And I need to know what you'd recommend that I do. Who should I talk to? What counsel should I have? What does this mean? What does this mean? And I'm sure, Manuel, you still talk to Jeffrey on occasion. So when you're doing that, kind of preparing to recover, I would say in sunny days, right, that we have without the disaster in our faces, is to reach out to those mayors and those resources and say, hey, what do you think we should do? We're going to come up with this plan, and we're going to be as robust as we can and comprehensive and whatnot, but we don't want to be caught off guard and flat-footed here. How did you guys tackle this? So great point, Maggie. Thanks.
And I want to piggyback on that before we get to the next question, very briefly. a lot of these towns and communities, like both of you just spoke, and a lot of the communities I work with are small, rural, marginalized communities, and there are grants, right? There's funding through FEMA, but just like both of you said, they don't have the capacity. They may not have the skills, right? They are just getting by day to day, maybe recovering from the past storm, right? And I think that's the power of this organization and all of us that are professionals, practitioners in the space, is to, right, be available, reach out, help those communities, share those resources, just like Dr. Gavin Smith's new project, right? Partnering with institutions, universities that may have the skills that can help these communities would be a big advice.
Thank you for that. Certainly with emergency management, it takes a village to get everything done, and there's a lot of knowledge, a lot of expertise in this room and through our connections. So making sure you're able to leverage those in those times of disaster is truly, truly critical. Maggie, I'd like to dive into some stuff post-disaster. So right after impact, we can see a whole bunch of different federal organizations coming in and providing services. There could be a whole bunch of different agencies. We could have FEMA, we could have HUD, we could have the Small Business Administration. There could be nonprofits coming in. How can we manage that at a local level or state level to effectively navigate that recovery process when there are so many different organizations coming in and trying to seek information and provide guidance?
Great question. And again, I will sound a little bit like a broken record, but I do recovery as part of my job. And I've also been a consultant, much like Jeanine. Actually, I've worked for the same company she works for. So, there's so much that goes into this, that the preparing to recover, I cannot stress enough, and that extends into the actual implementation of the recovery, right? One program that's starting, we're in kind of the second year here, but it's getting some good traction in Florida. The state of Florida, through FDEM, the Florida Division of Emergency Management, they have introduced a new program that they're calling FROC, which is the Florida Recovery Obligation Calculator. Not that that matters, but essentially FROC is an effort to encourage and incentivize through financial means communities within the state of Florida to prepare to recover. And so the short of this is you apply for FROC, they give you a questionnaire, and that questionnaire leads you through a lot of proactive thought exercises to explore, do you have a mechanism in place to track and document? Do you have a way of ensuring your policies are compliant? Do you have disaster pay plans? Have you worked out how you're going to coordinate, right, in the post-disaster space? And so it leads you through this questionnaire. You get the state will review this, they will rank and score you, and they give you an abatement plan, where essentially this is forcing communities to create a bit of a gap analysis in a structured way, right? A gap analysis of your capabilities and capacity to adequately recover, and also to adequately pursue the grant funds that you're going to need through HUD, SBA, FEMA, right? Any of these other organizations, even state grant funds, right? So are you adequately prepared, or where are your gaps? And so the state has this project or this program where it sort of leads you through this gap analysis. They give you an abatement plan, they give you advice and guidance on how you can actually go implement these changes. And so it's been, and the carrot part of this is once you do this, you get a score, and that score translates into money that the state will pay you upfront for your disaster losses before you filed with FEMA. So before you've actually gotten any money back from FEMA, the state will front you a portion of that money to help you start recovering quicker, because they've determined through this scoring system and this abatement plan that you're a good risk financially, because they know you've already taken all these proactive steps. So anyone at FDEM will probably say I have not done this justice, but that I think is an example of a good program in Florida that is incentivizing and helping move the needle closer to that preparing to recover. And some of that, right, as part of that, getting the communities in that mindset of preparing is the first time you meet with FEMA, the first time you meet with SBA, the first time you meet with HUD should not be post-disaster, right? Because it's not only a bad practice, but but it's sometimes hard to reach the people you need to reach. You may not realize the type of resources that these agencies are going to bring with them and what kind of support you have to set up, right? We had a no-name storm in Miami last summer, last June, and it did not receive a declaration from FEMA, but we did get a declaration from SBA. And so that was something where, you know, we had to set up disaster loan operation centers for them to operate out of. We had to do assessments. Our staff was going door to door, right, helping them get people signed up, you know, checking homes for damage, that kind of stuff. So understanding that process in advance smooths this all out, right? Because when SBA shows up, you know how to work with them and they know how to work with you. So I would encourage, again, as part of your pre-season prep, whatever season it is that you are up against, right? Be it winter storms or floods or what have you, is make contact with these organizations, with these agencies, and try to establish that early. And you know, the other thing is they've made changes, right? They've made changes to SBA declarations and assistance programs. They've streamlined the individual assistance program. They've removed certain requirements. So there's a lot of changes that are going on in that space. So again, investing in your recovery the way you would invest in your response will pay off and will give you a lot better return than if you just wing it, right, when something happens. So I don't know if that really answered the question, but
Yeah,
it's my tangent.
that's a good point in the pre-disaster space for sure. But in the post-disaster space, everyone's going to want to help you. Yeah. Everyone's going to want to help you. Every acronym soup is going to be at your front door, right? So how do you deal with that? My best advice to folks is to be demanding, to be loud and demanding and say, listen, I don't have time for you, all right? I appreciate your willingness to help, but I don't have time right now. But here's what I'm gonna do. This is your one point of contact in my little town of 900 people. This is the person that you're gonna talk to. This is the person you're gonna talk to. Nobody else, not the switchboard, not the public works guy out there trying to get debris off the roadway. This is your guy or gal, okay? Because I think a lot of times communities are so overwhelmed, and understandably so. I mean, can you imagine? If you've never experienced a disaster, it's horrific. It's, when you say devastating, it doesn't even, the word doesn't even capture just the trauma, okay? And then to have to deal with all of this help, in quotes sometimes, because it can be so overwhelming for folks, right? And I think to really get into your mindset, listen, you work for me. You, Noah, you work for me. You, HUD, you work for me. FEMA, you work for me, okay? This isn't working for me. This system of communication isn't working if that's the case, okay? The time commitment isn't working for me. And I think a lot of folks forget that, to have their voice, because it's so overwhelming. And they're in a terrible space. So I think remembering to be demanding, not even demanding, just have a voice, is probably one of the most impactful things I've seen people really embrace that have been able to successfully navigate the world, okay? And if you don't feel like you can do it on your own, find an advocate. Whether that is a mayor from a neighboring town or neighboring, you know, another state, right? As, you know, Manuel reached out to Louisiana and touched base with Jeffrey to get a good handle on things. Get a consultant, whatever the case may be, find an advocate if you need it. Thanks.
Yeah, being able to manage that span of control, especially post-disaster, is very, very critical. You know, Maggie, you touched on the FROC incentivizing recovery. That got me thinking about how we can do that at a more local level. So this is going to be for all panelists here. All disasters start and end local. So what can we do to incentivize resilience efforts at the homeowner level?
Okay. I think the first thing to do, and this kind of goes off of Jeanine, right? We have to listen. right? We have to listen to what are the needs, where are the recovery gaps, right, and efforts from the community. And I say that because you say local, right? And as we heard from Dr. Amanda Martin, right, each of these communities are so unique, and we have to tailor our recovery efforts to that community. So I'll stop there, but I think the first thing we need to do is listen, right? Hear from the community. What is it that they need?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think these are great forums for that. I think the work that we do with resilience, with mitigation, with emergency management, it's all intermixed. And you know, the more you go to these things, there's a lot of folks that sort of cross paths in that. And so I think building that network is really important, right? And engaging your stakeholders, engaging your homeowners is really great. In terms of incentivizing resilience at the homeowner level, I think part of this is less about incentivizing homeowners to do things that are in their best interest, as much as it is giving them the information and the resources and tools they need to be successful. I think, you know, I meet with residents periodically in Miami-Dade, and, you know, I've met with residents recently, for example, who are showing me pictures and videos of them like wading through floodwaters for just an average summer storm, right? Not even a thing that made the news. And, you know, I think some of this is they know that they need help, right? Residents understand, I think, the risks that they're up against. There are steps we can take at the government level to better inform them of those risks and to communicate risk in a way that resonates. But I think giving them the tools and the resources that they are desperately looking for is really the best way, I think, to move the needle on that. So, you know, giving them access to information about insurance products, right? Informing them about how they can sign up for NFIP, for the National Flood Insurance Program, taking proactive steps at the government level to invest in your community rating system to lower those premiums to make it more accessible, talking to them about parametric insurance, about different options, right? Ensuring that residents understand the difference between general liability insurance, hazard-specific insurance, and what is actually covered, so they're not caught off guard thinking that they have coverage they don't, right? Talking to renters and understanding that unique position, right? So making sure people understand the resources that are at their disposal and they know how to tap into them, I think is really helpful. The other thing, right, in terms of incentivizing resilience is getting them on board with any sort of efforts that you are taking at the system level. So stuff that requires buy-in from your homeowners to invest in large infrastructure projects, in drainage improvements, in elevations, right? I think this is really important because a lot of times we get pushback, right, for projects that the government wants to take because they cost money or they're inconvenient. So making sure people understand sort of the risk benefit of these things, I think is great. And, you know, this is a little bit off of this topic, but you mentioned before about, you know, getting advocates, right? Understanding that there's other stuff out there. I think as governments or as, you know, community leaders, I think understanding that there are other resources we can pull in these times of need, and it doesn't have to rest on our shoulders. So thinking about, you know, partners, thinking about mutual aid agreements, thinking about incident management teams that can come in and help. That's all, I think, really, really valuable. Again, another sort of best practice in Florida that is still sort of getting rolled out, but it's new. The state of Florida has recently launched something that they're calling Elevate Florida. Those of you who are familiar with hazard mitigation grants know that there are grants that do allow for homeowner mitigation projects, but homeowners very rarely can apply directly to the federal government. They have to be sponsored. They have to go through a unit of government. So this creates an extra hurdle because you need folks that can manage these grants on their behalf, that are willing to invest that time. Sometimes there's cost shares. Sometimes there's legal liability, depending on what project it is. So a lot of local governments struggle with the capacity to pursue homeowner mitigation, despite the fact that these funds are out there and available. But the state of Florida has created something called Elevate Florida, which they are in the very early stages of rolling out. But the state has has decided that they are going to take on this burden, and they will be the pass-through agency for homeowners throughout the state who wish to pursue hazard mitigation grants. So the state is going to invest in the grant managers, and they're going to deal with the cost shares and the transfers of funds and all of that. So this, I think, could be a really interesting pilot to see how we can bring more residents along for the ride, and also to try to shorten that window. I was speaking about this yesterday on the tour with some folks, but these sometimes I think we dangle these good ideas in front of residents, but then they're disheartened to learn how many hurdles they have to go through to reach that money, or how long this is really going to take, right? Like a average homeowner, like a flood elevation, right? A home elevation projects takes 3 to 4 years on average. That's way too much time. It's a lot longer than most people have before their house is underwater again. So, the goal here with this pilot project is not only to remove that burden from the local governments and to get more homeowners into the process, but also to shorten the timeline. So their goal is to do these in like 6 months instead of like 3 to 4 years. So hopefully by next year we can report out on some good success stories here, because this is relatively new. But I think that those are some tools, right? Thinking outside of the box, thinking beyond your borders as an agency. Where else can you lean on for support for your homeowners?
And I will say, for incentivizing, right, a lot of the times it's going to be financial. The communities that I talk with, again, these are rural communities, right? They are landowners. I don't think I mentioned this. I work in Robeson County with Lumbee Tribe. And often when I've asked them, right, asked them what are some practices, hazard mitigation practices. Really, we've asked about nature-based solutions and your willingness to accept these or incorporate these, implement these on your property. The number one is payments, right? They want to see that financial incentive. And Maggie talked about, right, some of those hazard mitigation grants, and there are a lot of hoops, and that's one reason why a lot of people avoid applying for these kind of grants. Other ones, if we're talking about rural landowners, through the USDA, right? Certain types of conservation practices that actually are great for flood mitigation too, and other types of co-benefits. There's other kind of programs for specifically rural landowners that can try to incentivize. The great thing, some of that come out of the U.S. Farm Bill, they will cover up to 70% of the costs. And in low income or marginalized communities, they will pay for up to 90% of the cost. And I hear from community members, this is the number one way, is through these payments, that they are really incentivized to make changes on their properties or lands.
So I'd agree with everything that's been said. Incentivizing resilience, I've seen some really great efforts in a couple of Western states where the local property taxes, they provide tax credits for homeowners who do xeriscaping, landscaping on their property. So I've seen certainly tax credits as being one method of incentivizing resilience. As far as getting back to what Maggie had said about the educational piece, I think scaring people sometimes works, and that sounds terrible, but really getting the message out about risk-driven data and the data analytics about what could happen to a property. A lot of folks really don't know. They don't know that their home, unless they, when they got their mortgage, they were forced to buy flood insurance. They don't really, some folks just don't know what the risk is. And I think really seizing the opportunity to educate homeowners about the risks they face is really eye-opening to a lot of folks. I mean, I play competitive pool. Don't hold that against me, but I play competitive pool, and I was at a pool tournament a couple of weeks ago on my island, which I try not to leave, and I was sitting there chatting away with someone, and we were talking about, he'd asked me, what I was working on. I said, I'm working on a couple of HMGP applications. I've got a flood and a wildfire one, and I've got a couple of brick applications so I was going through a little chit chat, and he said, geez, I wonder if so-and-so, my sister-in-law lives in Florida, I wonder what her house, like, is her house in danger? And I said, well, buddy, let's look at, there's something called the National Risk Index. Let's take a look at it. You just go online. It's going to take a look at that particular tract, census tract where she lives, her exact location, 18 hazards. It's going to do predictive modeling, and it'll say expected losses based on X, Y, and Z. And he's like, seriously? I'm like, seriously? No joke. This is where your tax dollar is going, my friend. Look at this. And so how do we do that? You know, we develop hazard mitigation plans, and I was a planner before I went into grants and chiefdom and all that good jazz, but I'm always amazed that it seems like nobody is interested until they have to be interested, right? Because we're a society, no offense to anyone in the room, but we have short-term memory loss, okay? We have a huge case of, you know, NIMBYism and all this that unless you experience it for some reason, you really don't get it. It's like being a little kid and touching the stove. Until you burn yourself, you sometimes don't understand. So how do we get that message out there? Yeah, we have great conferences like this, but we're all of us a similar mindset. And it's, to me, what I love about coming to conferences like this is that I hear about new, novel ways that maybe I hadn't thought about getting that risk message out there, that hazard message out there. So I'm sitting in a pool tournament and spreading the word, okay? So I think we have to think about, how do we do that kind of outside the box? Do we go to, you know, the local bingo hall? Do we go to the supermarket? Do we go to the fair? Like, what do we do? Because some of our more traditional ways, they just don't work. They just don't work. We post a sign that says, hey, we're doing the risk assessment for your county, all right? Do you want to know what your risks are? It's really exciting, it's sexy. Come on down. Now, you have like 5 people in the crowd, okay? So I think it's incumbent upon us as emergency managers, as risk reduction specialists, which we all are in the room. You can all call yourselves that. I'm just going to give you new titles. We have to think outside the box and really take a look at what's important to our community and then target those important meeting spaces and conversation areas and spread the word that way. So I don't really think he knew the conversation that was coming, but it was good. And I won, by the way. I'm just putting that out there. Yeah.
To add on to some of that, you know, again, some kind of, I guess, things to point to as far as programs or incentives or, you know, stuff that's in the works. You know, one of the things in Florida when it comes, this is all very flood, hurricane centric. So, you know, we'll have to extrapolate this if you're dealing with different types of hazards. But, you know, one of the things when it comes to insurance, we all know in Florida has 3 times the national average when it comes to insurance premiums. We have a growing number of people who are uninsured or underinsured. This is a real big threat to people's overall stability and resilience, not only on an individual level, but also at a community level. I think we've seen this play out before in other areas of our country. We saw it, you know, after Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Katrina, right? We saw just the devastation that occurred and the communities that were not able to rebuild. I was in the lower 9th Ward 10 years after Katrina, and it still looked like a ghost town. That's the kind of, like, when I think long range about recovery and resilience, I think about that, right? I think about what happens when it hits Miami, what happens when it hits on our coast, and we can't recover because the government is tapped and because the individual residents have no safety net, right? No financial safety net. You get communities that don't recover, right? Or you have blight or all of these things that are really negative to your, you know, your financial resilience and your recovery of your community. So, you know, some of the things in Florida, you know, I think some of this will, not to take the scare tactic approach, but some of it is just the reality that people are going to feel the need to invest in this when they can no longer get insurance, right? When they can no longer secure their financial future through traditional markets. And we're seeing that more and more. We have insurance providers that pull out of the state of Florida. The state of Florida has had to cash in bonds in order to put money into the commercial insurance market to basically beg and plead with these insurers to not leave, right? So the state of Florida is offsetting the cost of paying insurance claims in Florida for the private market through the selling of bonds, right? Because they know if we don't get these insurance companies to stay, we're shit out of luck, right? Like that's just what it is. And so the state of Florida is paying insurance companies to stay in Florida, right? This is a problem. This is a problem that we can't afford to keep doing, right? And so people are going to feel that whether they like it or not when they have, repetitive or severe repetitive loss properties and they can no longer insure them. So I think that's one way that this is going to come through and people are going to see it. I know that there was legislation introduced recently or in recent years to force people who are selling homes to disclose the prior claims that had been filed on that home. A lot of times, flood damage will occur and it will get fixed and it will be painted over and people will sell the house and people come and inspect, they buy the home and they are none the wiser about the real risk that that home is susceptible to. And so there's been legislation introduced to basically make it that you have to reveal that information up front when selling properties. And I think that that's a good change and a good step in the right direction, again, to better educate and inform people about what their risk is and what they're up against. For those of you who work in government, for a government agency, you can also apply for information sharing access agreements with FEMA. So it's an agreement between you as a unit of government and FEMA, DHS, and you apply and you request access to NFIP data, for example, for your community. So you apply for your information sharing agreement, they give you access to this on a regular basis, and now you can see which homes in your community have repetitive loss, severe repetitive loss. You can look at the claims data. You can kind of see where you've got these pockets of need or repetitive damage, which can help you from a planning perspective, help tailor your approach, right? Where can we invest in mitigation? Where can we invest in resilience? And where do we need to do a better job of reaching people so that they don't keep going through this, right? The other thing is a lot of times these funding programs, they put more stock in homes that fall into those categories. So if you can quickly identify those homes, it also allows you better opportunities to kind of get dollars where they go, right? Because a lot of these programs are prioritizing those repetitive and severe repetitive loss properties or using that as a criteria for funding. So I think understanding where that even is, again, to the point of data, right? And this lovely sheet that Meredith put together, there's a lot of good stuff on here, but we have to have data, we have to have information, and we have to be able to tap into the tools at our disposal to inform our planning, right? We can't start recovery when recovery is happening. We have to start recovery before a disaster. And we have to plan for it adequately, and we have to do that with information at our disposal. So, looking at those tools, those modeling, resources, the predictive technology, even information about what has occurred in the past, that all helps inform how we are going to recover and where we are going to focus our attention. So I would encourage you guys to look at that toolkit, but also kind of keep some of those things in mind.
That's an excellent point with the data sharing agreements with NFIP. I also want to point out post-disaster, there are data sharing agreements that can be made with FEMA so you can get access to the rosters of folks that have applied for individual assistance. This is a good mechanism that you can put into place to make sure that you're working with nonprofits to make sure no one falls through the cracks in that long-term recovery process. We've got a couple minutes left, so I just want to open it up to the audience if there's any questions. Got a couple questions here. Got some microphones coming for you.
This thing on? Okay. First of all, I wanted to thank you, Maggie, for the point that you made about the need to inform the public of risk when you're going to buy a house. North Carolina is a buyer beware state, and so I think that would really make a big impact to the message that you had there. But my question is, if you all have taken a look at or felt the need to leverage the informal networks that pop up post-disaster, because those are some really powerful examples of how communities come together and leverage opportunities, and how do you kind of formalize those after the fact and support that?
Question. Thank you so much. Yes, and the answer is yes. And to get more specific on it, in Miami-Dade, we have a pretty robust network that we've established sort of year-round, and we kind of tap into that blue skies and also gray skies. So we have out of emergency management, and again, I'll only speak to emergency management. We have folks in the room from our Office of Resilience who work really heavily in the community and have wonderful networks and avenues for engagement on a myriad of projects. And so tons and tons of great work going on with the Office of Resilience. But from the emergency management side specifically, we have two groups in particular that I think are really great. We have our CERT program, for those who are not familiar, Community Emergency Response Team. So we have our CERT program, which is individual volunteers who we engage on a regular basis with trainings, with activities, with community outreach events. We also have a program called MD Core, which is communities organized to respond in emergencies. MD Core is largely made up of volunteer agencies, faith-based, VOAD community groups. And so that is a wonderful group that has been revitalized in the last year or so. And it's also a good opportunity for us to engage those individual community level groups on a monthly basis, not only to inform them about the work that we're doing and the resources that we have, but also to find out what work they're doing and the resources they possess. And then, making sure that we're building those networks, we're engaging those community groups and individuals on a regular basis, and then utilizing them as force multipliers when it comes to our preparedness and also our post-disaster phase. We have spots in our EOC for some of these groups, and so we have representatives from these groups that are there with us riding out storms, and they can quickly tap into that network. So yeah, utilizing those groups as force multipliers is really important. But the one thing I will say is, volunteer groups tend to stagnate if you don't give them a reason to engage regularly. So making sure that you're building up those programs, not just building a roster, right? So if you build a roster, that's great. You know how to contact people. But if you don't give them a reason to engage with you regularly through a regular program, a regular push-pull, those networks are going to go stagnant, and they're not going to be as valuable as you need them to be in times of disaster. So I would say that, and then, we also, we've started last year, and then this year will be the second, is sort of revamping our approach to pre-season training and preparedness. We're sort of loosely calling it our trifecta training. So recognizing that we have these extreme weather events that all kind of kick off at the same time, extreme heat, extreme flooding, and hurricane season, all kind of within the same month. We have now tailored sort of trifecta training that covers all three of these. To inform people about risk and preparedness and what they need to know. And we've been rolling that out, and we do it over the course of about a month. And we have a series of these trainings in person and virtually in 3 different languages, and we just kind of blitz the community for a month or so with these trainings over and over to try to reach as many people as we can wherever we can get to them. And so that's been a good sort of public campaign and outreach. But yes, engaging those groups as force multipliers, I think, is a great idea.
All right, over here.
Hi, I'm Dave Jones with Storm Center Communications. I was just wondering what your thoughts are on how states would take over the response to disasters under either a diminished FEMA or a all-gone FEMA.
Wow, that's a good one. That's a really good one. So that's like the big elephant in the room. I've been waiting for that for like the last 2 days. I've been waiting for someone to say, hey, what are we going to do? Hey. Gosh. States already have partnerships, okay? EMAC, right? We've got, how many state folks do we have in here? Raise your hand. We've got state EOC folks, state emergency managers, resiliency managers. We've got a few. So we have some of those state-to-state partnerships. And I think I would envision, if there's a diminished FEMA, I would envision something like an EMAC partnership, but from a financial perspective, and states within a region pooling resources, state budgets and state resources. The Stafford Act gives money. That's the big kicker, right? So the Stafford Act says, okay, we have a presidential disaster. You're entitled to X amount of dollars. You're entitled to this. You're entitled to this. So what happens? Does all of that get transferred to a state or a regional council of states to manage that money? I mean, I was just looking on the news, and I find it like everyone should have microphones because I'm waiting to have this conversation, right? Like, how are we gonna do this? You know, I saw a press conference, or I think the president was in North Carolina, and had said something along the lines of, "Oh, if North Carolina gets hit, North Carolina can take care of it." And I'm like, okay, I'm sure their budget can completely do that, right? Like, you got it, North Carolina, you got that in your budget. And so there would have to be some mechanism where there would still be, you know, a preliminary damage assessment to try to figure out, well, how much is it going to cost, and then where are we going to get the money? Does it flow directly from the Fed to this kind of regional state governship for disaster? I don't know. I've been thinking about it, and I think maybe the regional approach where states kind of bound together, like the Southeast region, for instance, where we know you have a similar hazard that typically impacts you, right? So it makes sense to do it geographically and then figure out, well, where would we get the money, right? Are we supposed to come up with the money independently, or would that kind of pot of money still be there, but just in a diminished capacity? And how does it get transferred? And then how do we distribute it? Because you could model the distribution much like it is currently. You could model that where you would have a state IA and PA and mitigation fund, so to speak, and you could tailor it and improve it, right? Streamline it to make it less burdensome. Because someone had said, I think it was Meredith, who said the hoops you have to go through to get a mitigation grant. And I think Dr. Smith had said something about the BRIC program. It's a nightmare to navigate some of these programs. It's just working. I just finished, and I won't get too much off topic, but I just finished a grant application for a little town, 900 people, okay? They have a wonderful drainage project. We developed a robust drainage project. I'm proud as all get out of it, but it's going for BRIC. And I had to turn to this guy who's been working with me for the last month and knows me better than my family does at this point because we've spent so much time together. And I had to turn to him and I had to say, you're not going to get this. You do know, in all likelihood, you're not going to get this. You don't meet the disadvantaged criteria. We have no nature component. You're not going to get this. But you know what? We're going to keep trying. We're going to do other grant programs. And so, again, it's just the bureaucracy is just crazy. So how would we do that? I like this whole regional concept, and I think if that does happen, you can say Jeanine Neipert said it, right? You guys will kind of do that. I like that. And then just modeling and tailoring the types of assistance to be better and less burdensome. Sorry, Maggie, I just went off on a tangent because I've been thinking about it.
No, it's great. It is. I think it's a great question, and I think it's one that obviously none of us really have the answer to, and we are all like crossing our fingers and hoping that, you know, cooler heads prevail and we end up in a place where we can have a meaningful conversation. I think it raises the need for a meaningful conversation about the level of assistance that is occurring at the federal level and how unsustainable that is. And I think that's really more than anything what this is bringing to the table. I hope and pray that we do not get into a situation where the rug gets pulled out from under everyone quickly, because it will have devastating impacts. But I do think that it requires people to get in the room and think about that, right? FEMA was not designed to handle this level of disaster at every turn, right? The federal government was not intended to pay for every single thing every time the wind blew or the waters came down. That, combined with the frequency and the severity of these storms increasing, it is unsustainable. And I think that we are going to move in that direction. I think that if we really get into a situation where there is no FEMA, or not FEMA in the way that we currently have it, I think we're very quickly going to see impacts of that with regard to mass migration of people. So people's homes will be washed away and they will leave because they will not have a safety net to rebuild. So you'll have mass migration to parts of the country that are less hazard prone. That's number one. We are also going to see a lot more haves and have-nots because there will not be equity or distribution of resources in the way that we see now. And I also think some of our existing systems of collaboration will probably go away. I hate to say collapse, it sounds very doom and gloom, but EMAC, for example, is predicated on the idea that people will get reimbursed by the federal government. And so I think the second the federal government says they're not paying for it, you will very quickly see those coffers dry up, and you will see friendly states-to-state neighbors not helping each other anymore because there's no one that's going to come reimburse later. So I think you're going to see the situation where you may have had robust mutual aid agreements that are not going to get enforced. So let's hope it doesn't come to that, but I do think it requires a more nuanced conversation about managing risk, communicating need, and also shifting that burden lower down so people take more proactive steps at their individual level and, you know, build up capacity at the local government level as well to be able to deal with this challenge.
So I'm more hopeful than you are, Maggie. She's kind of a bummer, don't you guys think? I'm more hopeful. I think when push comes to shove and we're forced to do something, right? We're forced to acknowledge that, hey, no one's coming to help you. I think the states will stand up, and I think they will honor a pact, even though they're not going to get reimbursed. Because what are they going to do? I mean, you still have folks that need help. So I don't think that it'll be that terrible where we just go, you know, Armageddon chaos and no one talks to each other kind of thing. I don't think so. But I think it does give us an amazing opportunity. This conversation, I mean, the amount of uncertainty we have in our world right now gives us an amazing opportunity to have these conversations and really think it through, because we have to. I mean, it could happen. And so we have to. But I'm more hopeful than Maggie is.
I think this is the theme for SCDRP conference next year, right? We can brainstorm, be creative, the word of the day, or letter of the day, C, be creative, right? And I think the one thing that's really stuck with me, and I know we're at time, is Dr. Amanda Martin's remarks yesterday morning, right? We are trained in this. Like, we were built for this. This is our profession, right? We are resilient practitioners, professionals, and this is our job, and this is the challenge that we're faced with. So I'm also hopeful. But I think we can take it on, right? It's going to look different, right? But I think we're ready for it.
All right, well, stay tuned for more. But thank you very much for our panelists.